Hello, thanks for being with us on Parenting in a Pandemic, and welcome once again to the founder of the Triple P Parenting Program and a man with a wealth of parenting advice, Professor Matt Sanders.
Hi Katrina, nice to be here.
Well, Matt, this time we are looking at a very serious issue for families and Australian society in general, and that is protecting children from physical, emotional and psychological harm in times of intense family stress.
Yes, it's a very tricky time for a lot of families. We've had a couple of sort of recent cases of child neglect in the news, which has sort of shone a light on the issue for a lot of people. But, you know, at a time where there is extreme family stress, like there is right now, where so many people have been experiencing the consequences of COVID, and the things have become really quite difficult for many families, just kind of struggling to cope with the demands of daily life and keeping their families together. And their parenting responsibilities can be very, very challenging at times like this. And I think it's particularly important right now when parents are feeling lots of conflicted emotions. They're kind of worried about their health and exposure to COVID-19 and what the future holds, and there's so much uncertainty around that. The stress of homeschooling, I mean, particularly if you're a single parent and have been unable to share the load with anyone else, that's a tough gig, I think, for a lot of people. The stress of job loss and financial concerns that result from that. And of course, relationship issues are coming to the fore because people have been together more than they have been used to in the past in a lockdown situation, even though that's changing. So things can kind of explode a little more easily and more seriously than perhaps in the past. And I think the other thing is that there are some parents who are actually quite socially isolated, and even though we're talking about physical distancing and, you know, not really social isolation at all, that's the last thing that we want. Some people have experienced that over the last few months, and it can affect their mental health. So we've been in a situation where we've got less access to our usual social connections, the kind of services that were available that would also protect children, and respite that might have been available for families, for example, who have a child with special needs or a disability, maybe have been less accessible. So it's a challenging time right now.
Now, Matt, you recognise the importance of parents being able to recognise their personal breaking points. Do you have any examples that you can give of this?
Individual parents will have different things that can be a trigger for their kind of not being in control of their emotions with their children. For some parents, it's sleep deprivation. They're exhausted, they're tired, they've got the normal parenting responsibilities. The nature of caring for children can also be very challenging when, you know, kids are grumpy, they're irritable, they're not settling easily. So a parent who's trying to calm, soothe and settle their kids who won't do so, but is also sleep deprived, feeling overwhelmed and perhaps is not supported in that parenting role, that can lead parents to get to a point where they feel as though they could lose it quite easily with their kids. And this is a great concern for many parents.
It certainly is. And when we return, we are going to be diving deeper into how to really spot those warning signs that you could be at risk of losing control. Welcome back. Well, many of us have been dealing with enormous stress during this pandemic, from worries about catching COVID to financial strain to fear of the future, Matt. But in some families, those powerful stresses parents are dealing with can indirectly affect children too.
Yeah, I think to put this in context though, we've got to remind ourselves that stress and dealing with it is a normal part of life for everyone. And to be aspiring to have a family life that's always a smooth ride and kids are not having to deal with tricky situations that they find, you know, confusing and upsetting and distressing is just not what normal family life is about. However, during a COVID type situation where there's extra stress over and above things that had existed previously. It requires some, some special efforts to be made to make sure children are kept safe and are protected.
Well, joining us now to talk about how to do just that is Nikki Owen, who's a social work clinician with the Child Health Services Queensland. Welcome, Nikki.
Good morning, Katrina and Matt.
Good morning, Nikki.
Now, Nikki, how important is it that parents are able to identify their own personal threshold for stress to avoid putting their children at risk?
Yes, I mean, this is a hard one. So sometimes stress builds up and we don't notice it till we're really stressed. So it's sort of being aware of your own signals of stress and your risk of losing control.
Well, I imagine that one of the big flashpoints in recent times has been interacting with partners. That can certainly exacerbate an already stressful family environment.
Exactly. There's a lot of time at home. And then some people are dealing with some really difficult situations, as Matt said, about job losses and business difficulties and mental health issues. So it's really important for people to think about their own personal coping strategies. I think through COVID-19 and this difficult period, it's easy to go back to some unhealthy habits and use of substances, for example. And when we're being unhealthy, what does this mean for our ability to be consistent and available for our children? Really important for people to think about if they're caught up in that situation of stress and negative coping strategies, is that what sort of changes could they make going forward if it's not working for them and their family?
Do we really need to be watching how much we talk about distressing things in front of our kids?
Yeah, I think sometimes parents think that because children are on a computer game or are preoccupied with something that they're not listening and watching, but they often are, and especially if it's really important or serious, they're listening all the time. And children need to be buffered and protected by really adult themes. And it really helps children if they feel that the parents and adults are in control and can manage this, even if it's a difficult situation. That really helps children to not be too worried about things that they shouldn't really be focused on.
Matt and Nikki, I'll bring you both in. Is there a time when parents should really be seeking help beyond the home, and where do we go in that first instance?
Yeah, my view on this is really, I would just encourage parents not to wait until it's got to a really, really difficult situation, and be prepared to reach out, first of all, to those in your immediate social network, family and friends if you've got them. Certainly be prepared to speak to your GP if you're experiencing kind of emotional difficulties that are just not resolved by the normal kind of social support that you might get, but also be prepared to seek therapeutic assistance. If you're dealing with problems of anger or depression or anxiety, reach out. It's a healthy, normal, desirable thing to do at a time like this.
What do you think, Nikki? Where can parents go for help?
Well, I think all parents need some assistance, because parenting, can be a challenging experience. And there's lots of high quality parenting programs online or in person. There's been a real positive shift that there's been some really normalising of getting mental health assistance. And at the moment, the government's supporting people getting it online if needed. So you're not alone. So we're all here to support you and your family to get on track if things aren't going well.
Really helpful advice. Thank you, Nikki. Well, after the break, how stressed parents can interact with their children in positive ways. Thank you so much for your company on Parenting in a Pandemic. And today we're talking about the serious issue of protecting children during times of high family stress. And Matt, what kind of an impact can prolonged family conflict have on children?
It depends a lot on the nature of the conflict, because children inevitably will see parents disagree and argue at some point in time. One of the things that really influences what kind of effect it has on children is how an argument ends. If You can have a heated argument. If it ends in compromise or it ends in problem solving and the child sees the resolution of a problem, then kids aren't affected by it in a negative way. In fact, it actually prepares them for their capacity to enter relationships themselves because they associate conflict with solutions.
I would imagine as long as there's not like name calling or things like
Yeah,
that. Yeah,
but if it gets nasty and it gets really heated, if there are threats or if there is physical violence and children are witnessing this, this really is a form of abuse. It's a form of emotional and potentially physical abuse as well, because if it turns into violence, children are often on the receiving end of it in the same household. It's particularly damaging for children if it occurs over a long period of time, and it can impact really, really significantly on their emotional health and well-being in a long-term sense. And so what it can affect is their learning, it can affect their relationships. They often feel insecure in their relationships with their parents because that kind of conflict is often associated with inconsistency and escalation. And when it comes to children then being in the picture and perhaps misbehaving and so on, they're more likely to develop behavioural and emotional difficulties because the parenting is not calm, it's not consistent, and it's occurring in a conflictual environment. And of course it can affect their health. If kids are witnessing violence or potentially experiencing it themselves, kids get injured. In fact, kids get seriously injured.
Yeah, how dreadful. Well, and Nikki, we'll come to you now. How do we ensure as parents that we interact with our children in healthy, positive ways, particularly if we are feeling stressed?
Yeah, it is really difficult, but if we can stay as calm and consistent as possible when we're dealing with our kids under times of stress, and to let them know that they can rely on us even at times of stress. It's also really helpful to understand the situation from your child's point of view. So they might be acting out because they're stressed and worried themselves, and the conflict's really affecting them. Try and let the kids know that they can talk to you about their worries and listen and be empathetic and help problem solve the situation from the child's point of view. You can also be available to them to talk about their concerns. For example, if they're really anxious about the virus, which a lot of us are and were, and there's some really good resources online like Birdie's Tree, which has online books and interactive games where Birdie's dealing with the virus. It might be really helpful too to spend some quality time with the children where there's no pressure to do anything. Everyone just chill out, be on the floor and play with them, or just watch them and interact with them while they're doing things that they like. Look for the positives and watch out for when they're doing well and give them praise. Another really positive thing that happened through this period is a lot of families were doing a lot more outdoor activities together. So, you might go and do a healthy activity for everyone to bring down their stress levels. Go for a walk or a fun sort of activity in the park or a bike ride, or even do a games night. So these sort of things that sort of take the heat out of the stress that everyone's experiencing and refocus your attention back on some quality time with the kids.
How important, Nikki, is it to have conversations with our children about safety? And I guess, how do we broach that conversation?
Yeah, I think talking about safety is an important thing to sort of raise with kids from an early age in an age appropriate way. We don't want to make them fearful, but we want them to start noticing how they feel and think when they are not feeling safe, whether that's at home, at school, or even online. So we can have a talk to them about when they're feeling uncomfortable, what could they do with this distressing situation? And that they can come to us, and also that there's a range of other people that care and support them. So there's a lot of people that they could reach out and talk to in their family and friends and school environment. At the moment, but generally, there's a lot of screen time happening for children, and this increases their risk of like online predators, cyberbullying, or watching things online that they shouldn't be watching. So it'd be really helpful to talk to kids in an ongoing way about online safety such as no personal information, not talking to children or adults that they don't know.
So we've covered off how to ensure our kids' safety outside of the home, but what about their safety inside the family? What tips do you have there?
If a parent's finding they're unable to meet their own needs, and if they're starting to lose their cool, they need to walk away, take some deep breaths until they calm down. Sometimes everyone needs to have some time out from each other. As parents, we need to really tune in if your anger is becoming out of control. Really heightened anger impacts on how we see everything around us, including how we see our children and our partners and their behaviour. And our thinking can become a bit distorted.
Matt, do you have any other advice you can add?
Yeah, it's interesting in a situation where normal behaviour is occurring, like kids break something or they spill a glass of milk, or they're just a little clumsy. If parents are able to detect themselves saying things like, "He did that on purpose. He's deliberately doing that to annoy me. We've got to go out and it happened right now. He always is like that. He's just like his father and it's never going to change." Those kind of thought processes feed anger, because the parents often then feel retribution is justified because it's deliberate, when in fact he's a 3-year-old, or and it's just normal developmental behaviour where he's a little clumsy, he hasn't learnt the skills yet. Now those sort of thoughts are really, when you detect them, they are troublesome triggers for loss of control. And so if you can change those thoughts to say, is there any other reason this might have happened? Like, he's tired, he's the 3-year-old, he hasn't learnt the skills yet, maybe you haven't given him enough attention at all during the afternoon, and now he's more likely to do this. That is much more likely to enable you to have a calmer response, but you're tackling it at the level of your thinking processes.
Yeah, excellent advice. Well, Nikki, we might thank you now very much for joining us today on this very important topic. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Katrina. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki.
And stay with us, because when we come back, why we all need to play our part in protecting children, even if we're not parents. Welcome back. Thanks so much for joining us. Now, Matt, a popular expression that many people are saying during this particular pandemic is we're all in this together. And that's especially the case when it comes to protecting children in our community, isn't it?
It certainly is. And I think one of the things that we just have to remember is that when it comes to family life, and if you're a parent, if you make children your highest priority, it will activate a whole lot of processes to protect them. It's so important to be a friend to a parent and to just be on the lookout all the time for the things that are little signs that a parent may need some additional assistance. They need a friendly person to talk to, someone who's able to listen to an issue that they're going through. And it's not just a question of providing an audience and providing kind of emotional support, because sometimes doing practical things to assist our friends with, giving them a break, looking after their kids for a while, it's not always easy, but gee, it is so nice to know when you're a parent that there's someone else out there that you know who cares about you and who cares about you and your relationship with your children.
Now, Matt, we've covered so much ground during today's episode, but to wrap up, can you please help us revisit some of those key points in ensuring our children's safety?
I think it is very important for parents to become aware and tune in to the impact some of these life events that they're experiencing are actually having on them personally. So that's like to be much more personally aware of what they're dealing with and how they're coping with it. Because if you're not coping well and you're using strategies that make it worse, then it's much harder for everyone in the family. The other thing that's a kind of an extension of that is how this is impacting upon your relationships within the family. The most important thing is that there is a kindness towards each other, there's good communication, and whatever disagreement and conflict is there is managed rather than avoided or just dealt with in a kind of open warfare. Protecting kids is everyone's responsibility. It's not just you as an individual parent, because one minute you may be feeling vulnerable and losing control, but the next minute you can be a friend and a supporter of someone else who's also going through a difficult time. The slower pace, I think, over the last few months has given a lot of families moments to reflect on what's happening and to really ask, what they want to preserve about how they're dealing with the current situation and what they'd never like to see return at a later time.
I think that slower pace of life has been such a silver lining for so many families.
I think so. It really has.
Thank you so much again for all your advice and wisdom, Matt.
You're very welcome.
Well, many thanks to you for joining us for this episode of Parenting in a Pandemic. We'll be back again on Thursday with another episode. And don't forget too, you can head online for plenty of resources and materials that we've discussed in our show today. And you can watch any episodes you've missed so far on 7plus at any time. Until next time, stay safe and stay well.